Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Nir Barzilai, who is the scientific director of the American Federation for Aging Research. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are a very exciting organization that have jump-started the hope that there might be something that we can do to stop and even reverse aging. And if you're new here into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe, either on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about, what would our lives be like if we could stop the slow and painful disease, maybe, that is aging. So many questions, and I just want to get into this interview. So, Nir, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Pleasure being with you and your audience. You're all new recruit to this new world.
Beautiful. So, tell me first about the American Federation for Aging Research and the work that you do.
Well, you said it rightly. You know, we had 20, 30 years old, we had hope that, you know what, we don't know a lot about aging. It sounds very complex, but maybe in the future there's something that we can learn and we can do something about it. And the American Federation of Aging Research have moved us from hope to promise. And the promise is basically that, yes, there is a biology of aging because we know who's old and who's young, right? But that this biology drives the diseases, and there's actually a way to target the process of aging itself and prevent the diseases so that we can live healthier for much longer period of our lifetime.
That is incredible. So targeting this aging then, are you talking diet and lifestyle and environment changes, or are we talking some kind of biology hack?
Well, from all of the above, if that was a multiple choice question. So let me start with the biology, because what we've done, we geroscientists have done, we agreed on like 9 hallmarks of aging. How do you become a hallmark of aging? In order to become a hallmark of aging, you have to show that something changes with aging, declines with aging. And if you target it, you improve health span and lifespan in animals. It's interesting that they're interconnected. You don't have to target all of them to have an effect. One of them can influence the other because, you know, if you take an old cell or organ or body and makes it young, a lot of things are fixed. So we have an agreement on those hallmarks and on their target. And in this process, we discovered what we call either geroprotectors or gerotherapeutics. You know, gerotherapeutics will be drugs. Geroprotectors were things like exercise or diet that if we stick to it, we can extend, again, the health span and maybe as a side effect, the lifespan of us.
Beautiful. I'm so excited about this topic. But first, for someone that is not familiar with these terms, what's the difference between health span and lifespan? And do you even want to live to 100 years old?
Right. You know, unfortunately, so that's how I would describe it. If I'm telling you that if we target aging, we prevent the disease, then we're also going to live longer. Okay. So I cannot really honestly say, no, I'm only for health span, because lifespan will be affected. And I'm joking and I'm saying, you know, if there's an advertisement for a drug, like there are advertisement now. Now you see advertisement and you say, I don't want this drug because it can cause everything that I'm afraid of. But for me, the drugs that target aging are going to target aging, prevent diseases, and their side effect, one of them will be longevity because, hey, maybe I don't want to live long. Maybe I cannot afford to live long. So we're kind of trying to make the impact on health span. So let me give you an example. One of the research projects that I'm doing, I'm looking at 750 centenarians, 100 years old, and their families. And one of the questions we asked is, so do they get sick when everybody gets sick when they're like 60 years old? And now they live 40 years with diseases? Or is their lifespan and health span go together? And the answer is that they're getting their diseases 20, 30 years later than everybody else. So they're a group of people whose lifespan and health span goes together. And there's another exciting thing. They're sick very little time at the end of their lives. We called it a contraction of morbidity. And think about it for society, what it means that we live healthier, basically, and then we die one day. How much saving is it? It's actually, there's a longevity dividend. Even the CDC calculated that the last 2 years of somebody who's 100 years old cost third of those who die when they're 70. So there's a real longevity dividend in staying healthy. Now, you raised another issue. Do I want to live? Do I want to live? And, there are people who are immortalists. And I'm telling them, if the world is going to survive 12 billion years, and you're saying, hey, let's live 12 billion years, I'm a little bit tired already. I don't know how many things I want to still see or learn or experience, but this is not what we're about. We're about extending the health span.
Got it. Thank you for that explanation. Then I'm curious, what can I do then as an individual to ride this wave of longer lifespan and better health?
So let me mention three things. One thing that is right, and it's the first and most important thing, and it applies to every sex and every age, always exercise, or maybe when you're older, move, okay? The more you're exercising, the more you're moving, your health span and lifespan is going to increase. We know that from many studies, and this is the best advice that I would give. If you're older, get one of the watches, and I have a Fitbit, and try to have a goal. I'm not going to bed if I didn't do at least 10,000 steps in some form of another. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Second thing is diet. Now, one thing about diet is not to be obese, okay? By the way, to be lean is not associated with better mortality. Actually, a little bit overweight is the lowest mortality. But this is the advice that I would give. In my lab and in many other labs, we used to do this experiment that's called caloric restriction. We would take mice or rats and take brothers and divide them to two groups. One eat whatever they want, and the other eat 30 or 40% less. Okay, so that's caloric restriction. And when you do that, the animals live 40% longer and much healthier. And we took it to say, if you eat less breakfast, less lunch, less dinner, you live longer. But that's not what we did. What we did was actually bringing the food to those animals in the morning. And they are hungry because they have less food through the day. So they consume the food, and then they were fasting for like more than 23 hours. And so fasting became important. if you actually give the food throughout the day, they are leaner, but they don't live much longer. You need the fasting to live longer. And that's why me and a lot of us and a lot of other people who care of their health are doing some form of fasting. I do the 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. So I basically skip breakfast. I stop eating like at 8 o'clock at night. I count 16 hours. At noon, I'm having my next meal. Nothing in between. No cheating here. And then in those 8 hours, I eat whatever I want. And you find that it's easy to do because for me, if you gave me diet for 3 months, I could break any day. But if I have only an hour or two to go, I'm not going to break. And you find that it gets easier with time. And I bet that that's the way to go about diet. And then there are drugs. And we can talk about that later.
I'm curious about the drugs, but I have two questions about both exercise and fasting, because I do both myself. I do 16/8 fasts once every month. I skip a whole day of eating. Sometimes I do 3-day fasts as well. But where is more better in both fasting and exercises? And where is the sweet spot if I want to maximize my longevity?
That's a really good question, because look, with the caloric restriction, we know one thing. If you give the animals zero food, they'll die really fast, right? So there's the right amount. And in fact, the right amount depends on the genetics of the animals. You find out that sometimes you do 40% diet in a certain strain of animal, and they cannot. It's like you starve them. That's not helpful to them. So it's kind of an individual, and I think we don't know to give a precise answer for that. And it's the same for exercise. We don't know what's the best exercise. It's possible that too much exercise is too much harm with biological reason, increasing oxidative stress. We know that marathon runners accumulate fat deposits in their muscles. There are lots of things that we know are bad if you do excess. So we have to be reasonable, and to tell you what's reasonable, I cannot, because we don't have real good data on that.
Got it. But still, I'm exercising, I'm fasting, I'm eating a healthy diet. Let's talk about drugs. What more can I do to take it to the next step?
Well, once we talk about drugs, we can talk about nutraceutical that you can get over the counter, or we can talk about, when I said drugs, are drugs that need to be prescribed, right?
Let's start with the nutraceuticals.
Well, with the nutraceuticals, there's a nutrient sensor in our cells that's called NAD. And this NAD is really something that is important for the good metabolism in our body, but not only the metabolism, but the maintenance of things that break down with aging. And there are nutraceuticals that are called NMN or NM that are the precursors for those for this NAD, and they are very popular. I would say there's several problems with that, and I totally believe in that. But the nutraceutical, let me make just a sentence about nutraceutical. Nutraceutical are mainly good for the economy, okay? There's lots of money there. Lots of people are making their living. It's really good for the economy, okay? Now, are they good for the people? Well, some of them are good for the people, and we don't know because there's no studies. Some of them are bad, okay? And we know enough in order to know it's bad. But anyhow, because you don't have really a lot of management or supervision of the nutraceutical, a lot of the nutraceutical don't have what they say they have. So now if I'm going back to this M&M on NN or the nicotinamide supplements, the problem is that they're unstable, okay? Think of what we learned on the mRNA vaccine that needs, minus 80 degrees. It's kind of similar. They're not very stable. So if you get off the shelf something that stood there already a month, I don't know how much there is there. And also their difference between the preparation, between the companies that are preparing it, it's a little bit of the Wild West in this area. And I hope that it'll get together and people will understand better what's their benefit and also study them.
Makes a lot of sense. Tuning into what I want to know.
You want drugs now. You want drugs.
Oh, we didn't even start with the drugs. I thought NMM was the drugs.
No, NMN is one precursor of this NAD supplement, the NAD. So I just gave it as example because this is the example that I believe in most. Mm-hmm. Some vitamins we know are dangerous in certain situations, right? Like vitamin E can be dangerous if you're exercising intensively. There are lots of things with the vitamins that are not good. And I'll tell you, most of the people that are taking vitamins are getting enough of them because they're taking care of themselves. So they eat vegetables, they eat food and they get it. So that's my problem.
So let's talk about drugs then, the pharmaceuticals.
So there are two drugs that have been in human use, but have not been repurposed for aging. Okay. So what I'm telling you, there's no FDA approval for any drug that targets aging. In fact, it's a problem because the FDA doesn't know that aging drives diseases and maybe we should prevent aging rather than do other things. It's a problem that we have when we live in silos and we are totally taken by what we know and we're not open to other things. It's a real problem when it comes to aging. The science has gone so far, but the people who should know don't know a lot about it. But one of the drugs that targets all the hallmarks of aging is called metformin. Metformin is a drug that derives from French lilac. And in the 1950s, it was found that, or it was used to prevent flu and malaria and some other infectious diseases. And in this process, it was discovered that it lowers glucose in diabetic patients. And so all of a sudden, metformin is now an anti-diabetic drug. And it is an anti-diabetic drug, but not only. The good thing is that it's been used by over 70 years to treat diabetes. So we know a lot of things about it. For example, we know that people without diabetes will not develop diabetes or it'll prevent diabetes in a lot of people. We know that people on metformin versus anti-diabetic drug have less cardiovascular disease, have less cancers, have less Alzheimer's. And actually, people who diabetic who are on metformin have lower mortality than people their age that are not diabetic. So it has a very strong influence on health and mortality. And we're trying to lead a study that will prevent a cluster of diseases so that the FDA will give a permission and we'll have a template to go and target aging strongly.
Super interesting. I heard about metformin from David Sinclair as well. So are you taking it?
Yeah, I'm taking metformin. I started taking it because I was pre-diabetic. I'm not anymore. But I had a reason. But again, you need a doctor to prescribe metformin. It's not a nutraceutical.
Is there something I should be aware of if I'm taking metformin? As young male that is exercising? I heard something that it influences exercise somehow.
That's a really good point. So people who, if you take a group of elderly people and exercise them with and without metformin, the metformin blocks a pathway that is called mTOR that builds the muscle. When you have mTOR, you also have accelerated aging. Okay? So the studies show that yes, the muscle is bigger in people who don't take metformin. But interestingly, when you look at the function of the muscle is similar in the two groups. In other words, even if you have less muscle, every gram of muscle is stronger than just exercising. Now, what we did is we took biopsies from those studies and we looked at the transcript, at the biology of those with and without metformin. And we really found that on one hand, everything that has to do with mTOR, this is the one that's building muscle but is bad for aging, is increased by exercise and decreased by metformin. But then there are transcripts that are specific for aging, for the hallmarks of aging, that were expressed in the people who are exercising on metformin. So there is a trade-off, okay? If you really want to have your muscle big, don't take metformin. But if you want to keep aging, you should exercise and take metformin because the muscle will be healthier.
That's really
smaller,
interesting.
But healthier.
That's really interesting because one of the things I know is reducing aging is to reduce amino acids. So I guess that metformin and amino acids increase mTOR, right? So,
exactly.
So I guess what metformin is doing, it's simulating being vegetarian almost, or eating less amino acids.
Actually, I never thought about this way, but you're right. Like metformin is kind of making your body vegetarian, even if you eat meat.
That is very interesting. I'm getting excited to get me some metformin.
And let me tell you something else about metformin, because we don't want to ignore the times. There are 9 studies around the world that showed that people who were on metformin had much less hospitalization and much less mortality. In fact, people on metformin have 2/3 less mortality than people who are not on metformin. There's nothing like that in the COVID-19 literature, such a big effect. Really also supporting the notion that, that the elderly who have immune decline and inflammation and have a body that's old to sustain severe disease, that metformin takes care of all of that.
Wow. That's incredible. You're tickling my excitement there. Is there something, we're going a little bit longer than usual, but I feel like it's worth it for today, because I want to know, what is your perspective on stress and sleep?
Stress is kind of one of the hallmarks of aging in certain forms. The people who believe in stress says it's all stress. Okay, there's this argument. You don't hear it from any other group, but people who are dealing with stress, no, aging is stress. Well, stress is translated to biology. There's no doubt about it. But let's distinguish between chronic stress. If you have pain every minute of your life, severe pain, and you cannot do things and you cannot sleep and stuff like that, this is a stress that you want to avoid. But exercise is a form of stress. Okay, when you exercise 1 hour a day, boy, you put your body on stress. You increase oxidative damage, you do damage to the muscle, you do a whole buildup. But this is, as I said, it's a good stress, right? So we have to distinguish by what stress exactly means. I will tell you, there's an observation in my centenarian studies. I have lots of people who were Holocaust survivors and who became 100 years old, and you ask yourself, there's a whole theory of hormesis. Hormesis is that you need the stress in order to regulate your defense against what comes with aging. So like stress is good for you if it comes several times, and I wonder if the Holocaust for people who survived was hormesis. You can throw anything against them now and they'll still survive. I have an uncle who's a Holocaust survivor.
Very interesting.
He's 98 years old. He's in Houston. He still is a professor at Baylor, had grants until recently. And he said he survived 5 concentration camps. And then he had to escape Prague in 1968 when the Russians came in, and he went to Vienna, then he went to Quebec. In Quebec, his house was bombed by separatists. So eventually he got to Houston. Now in the last hurricane, his house was demolished. And he's like, what do you want to do more? And you wonder, this guy, wow, his body is built very differently in response to stress.
Wow. That's a very interesting perspective. Thank you so much for that. Okay. Is there something else you would like for our listeners to know about longevity that I haven't touched on?
Yes. I'd like to say a few things. And you had David Sinclair, right? On. So
not on, but I've read.
Oh, okay. So one point, you can take an egg of a 50-year-old woman and we can determine the age, and you can take a sperm of a 70-year-old man, and you can fertilize the egg and have a baby, and the baby will be fine. When you do that, when the babies form, when the cells are dividing, they don't remember the age of the parent. Okay, we all started in 0 again. Okay, so in this case, we found our own mechanism to erase aging. And this is kind of the next step in aging, is to find not only how to stop the aging, but how to erase the aging to happen. And so there's a much larger promises ahead. The second thing is, we are not talking only about the elderly, really. If you want to go to Mars, okay, we're not going to get there without stopping aging because of radiation. By the time we're there, we're going to have a cancer or heart disease, and we're never going to come back. If there are aliens now here, they stopped aging. If aliens will come and see us, they'll say, "Are you kidding? You haven't stopped aging yet? That's not so hard to do." But more than that, I talked about radiation. Radiation and chemotherapy for cancer survivors age them immensely. They need help, okay? Kids get age-related disease very early on. HIV patients get diseases 10 years younger than their friends. People who are disabled and they cannot exercise and they probably eat more than they need, they need help too. I would say lots of poor people that cannot afford good food and exercise, maybe a simple drug can help them live healthier. So let's talk about it in a global way. Most of us will age. Some of us will not. Those that will not might need help also.
So much wisdom in this podcast. I very much appreciate you taking the time here to come here and teach me and our listeners about what we can do to slow down our aging. I'm going to go research metformin right after this podcast.
You're welcome, and thank you for spreading the gospel. Everything I said it as a scientist and as the scientific director of American Federation of Aging Research, and this is not science fiction.
That is an important point. Thank you for making that. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And for you listening, if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that will show that this is an important conversation. So it will rise through the algorithms so more people can learn what they can do to be proactive and take steps to slow down their aging. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. What is great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is great.com to learn more.